wanting to talk about impact in the round and not to just focus on definition, a ref definition, or a definition which is a STEM definition, or to see about impact just in terms of policy and so on. So I'm going to talk about two examples from research we've done, which perhaps illustrate this, because the second is an example about influencing policy, but the first is an example where we've tried to really just, our impact has just been impacting the community we're working with and really helping them to hopefully understand that community better and reflect on that community better. What links the two examples is that they both involve elements of co-creation or co-production with communities and with stakeholders. And I think this is quite important in terms of thinking about how we do impact. And moving, again, to pick up on something Kirsty said about the way in which we're moving to a way of approaching impact, which perhaps moves beyond some of the older fashioned ideas, that this isn't the conventional model of impact. You do your research and then you try to have an influence with that, you disseminate that. And moving away from that to an approach where impact is embodied in what we're doing, co-creation is embodied in terms of working with partners throughout the research process. And in doing that, impact and research and engagement all become collapsed together. That's the things we've been doing in the examples I'm going to talk about, are not necessarily doing them in order to have an impact. Certainly in the first case, it was, well, this is how we wanted to undertake the research and to engage the people we're working with. And hopefully there will be an impact coming out of that, but impact wasn't what was driving it. So thematic co-production and creation is a different way of approaching this. So I'm going to talk about two projects we've done. I'm going to very quickly run through examples of what we did in those projects in terms of co-production, engagement, and impact with communities and stakeholders. I've then got one slide where I'm going to just reflect on some ideas, and we can pick up on some of the detail about some of the examples if people want to ask questions about that later on in the discussion. So the first project I want to talk about is what we did as part of a European Research Council Advanced Grant Global Rural. Whereas at the overall project, we're interested in how rural places engage and are reshaped through globalization. This involved research all over the world, but also involved research just here in Wales. And one of the work packages was an in-depth case study of what we called everyday globalization in Newtown. And that, I think, actually speaks to Kirsty's last point about Welsh facing research and international research. And in a project like this, we're trying to do both. And in Wales, we're focused on Newtown as an in detail case study. And we're interested in everyday globalization, by which we meant all the little things in which we engage with global connections, what the businesses were doing in the town, what they're trading to, what people are traveling to, the food people are eating, the background of people who come and live in the town, and trying to capture all of that. And to do that, because we needed to build it up from the bottom up, from the grassroots up, we very deliberately tried to use participatory methods to do this. So this involved, for example, working with schools and local societies. And some of these ideas work better than others. But some of the things we tried, we had a project with primary schools in the town with postcards, where we got them to send postcards to relatives or friends in other parts of the world. And we tried using that to try to map where their connections were. But it's a bit of fun to do that. We then also worked with sixth form students, where we got them to do a survey of the availability of different brands of soft drinks in stores in the town. And in both those settings, we did that in the context of going into the schools, taking assemblies, contributing to lessons. So we were embedding what we were doing in part of how they were themselves exploring these subjects about geography and about globalization. But we were ourselves getting research we could use in our broader project. Another example was work we did with the Women's Institute, where we got members to keep a food diary for 2 weeks over Christmas. And we're interested in terms of what they cook, why, but reflecting on the international influences in that food and where that food came from. We also had other attempts at trying to crowdsource information. So We had a presence at some events in the town, like the Newtown Food Festival. We had a stall, and we had some things like jigsaws and sticking pins on the map of where you've travelled to engage people. We're also doing a more conventional survey of residents of the town at the time. We use it as an opportunity to engage people in that. But we also had a website dedicated to this particular work package. And as part of that, we had a crowdsourcing element of inviting people to submit their own stories. We've given updates on the project, but again, asking people to respond to them and submit their own stories. At the end of that project, we held an exhibition over the course of 2 weeks in the town. We had a building in the Market Hall there, space in the Market Hall there, and we used a traditional exhibition to again feedback, report back on what we did, a mixture of different ways of presenting that material, some of it done orally, some of it done in terms of posters and so on. We had, I'm not quite sure how clearly this comes out, it's not clear on my screen, but we had a kind of sign up saying corrections and said that this is our outsider's view of the town. Tell us what we've got wrong. Tell us from an insider point of view why what's different. We had various efforts still of collecting information through little kind of games, but also through a wall where we had lots of questions, and we had people sticking up post-it notes on what they think of globalization, the future of the town, and the priorities of the town. And this again gave us additional material we could use, and part of it was designed in conjunction with the town council that were getting feedback on questions they were interested in. Alongside that, we also had a listening project, and this was an artistic project. We actually did an open call for artists to submit ideas. We got a range of different ideas, but we selected a sound artist, Caitlin Shepherd, who came up with this particular idea, in which she went and did interviews of various people, collected oral histories, collected people thinking about how they reflect on the town, what they'd like to see, how they'd like to see the town develop. And then alongside the exhibition, she had a stall next door to us, which was then set up as an installation as the listening booth, and a nice comfortable chairs to go in and listen to that, and to listen to other people talking about Newtown. And then she was also interviewing people who once they'd done that, but what their reactions were, what they agreed with, what they disagreed with. So all of this was, again, generating new data, but also a way of engaging people in the town, getting to think about, reflect on their own experiences in the town. So the impacts coming through this weren't policy related, but they were about trying to inform and shape opinion in the town itself. And this also fed in the broader scale to the wider website we had, where we used a particular software called Esri Story Maps to present interactive and multimedia accounts of these stories, including several from Newtown, and there's one just in the corner here where we're tracing the business trading links of town businesses in the town, and throwing up some interesting examples of businesses which were producing huts which were being used in Antarctic research stations, or components for super yachts and so on. The second brief example I want to then mention is current research we're doing with a Horizon 2020 project on rural urban outlooks, robust. And this whole project is designed around an action-oriented methodology using what are called living labs. Living labs are focused on particular places or arenas of a type, and they involve the collaboration of academic and non-academic stakeholders in experimental research, playing with ideas, but with a practical outcome. So within this broad European project, in each region, a scientific partner is paired with a non-scientific partner, in our case, the Welsh Local Government Association, and we decide within each region with our collaborator partners what are we going to focus on, what we're going to try to do for this research. And in Wales, we decided to focus on producing a new vision for rural Wales. So through that process, we've gone through various elements of engagement, both with the local government, but also with other rural stakeholders and organisations. We started the workshops working through people's overall priorities, what they think is good about rural Wales, what they think the problems are. We also from this generated a number of potential scenarios. We used an online survey to test those scenarios, but also to collect people's thoughts about the potential opportunities and challenges, ideas of case studies. From those, we took that into a virtual workshop where we used tools like Google Jamboard to engage people in small breakout groups. We could do both English and Welsh, using virtual post-it notes to again talk about challenges and opportunities from the key scenarios, talk about to comment on their views on some of the initial proposals we're developing. And then we've now come back to further meetings with key stakeholders, local government leaders and so on, refining that set of proposals. And there will be a kind of manifesto document, if you like, coming out of this towards the end of the year. So just some brief closing reflections on these experiences. I think the value of both these approaches is that we're researching with communities, not just researching them. And that to me is more important than just thinking about impact. It's thinking about who is our research benefiting and how are we engaging, relating to the people we work with. And it can give us additional and richer insights, I think, in terms of the research we get. It allows that research we do to pull into those local communities. There's lots of things that talk about things like open access, but people in local communities are not going to read your open access papers, regardless of whether they're free or not. We need to actively engage them in other ways, in going into schools, going into women's institutes, a much more effective way of engaging those people. On the other side, this can be very time consuming. It needs lots of preparation. We need to not need to assume that everyone's going to be enthusiastic about our research or interpret it and understand it in the same way as us. So sometimes these things don't go quite as we anticipate because we can't infuse people or because actually they've interpreted it completely different as we thought. That means it requires adaptation. It needs a sense of give and take. It means sometimes the focus of these engagement activities are not what the main purpose of our research is, but this is the way of making the connection so that we can get things which contribute to our wider, our main objectives. And that means that actually we need to think about what benefits those partners we're working with, and that's not always the same as our research objectives. There can be issues of data quality and regular consistency about some of these approaches in terms of what more conventional research methods involve. And that may have impacts on how precisely we can use this material in scientific articles. To my sense, actually, if I can't use all this in scientific articles, but it still has an impact in the community, it's still worthwhile doing. But we need to recognize that we need to do both if we're able to kind of please our funders and please our universities. And it's about proceeding through trial and error. Some of those activities I've mentioned briefly in this presentation worked very well. Some didn't really work at all. They didn't really come back and generate material. And engaging and trying to work with people is about trial and error, trying different things. And some of it will get through, and some of it may well have an impact. But that has to be, I think, we have to think about how this fits into the round of producing better quality research for us and for everyone who's involved in that process. Thank you.